Hello, my piece is titled The Spirits That Never Fade. My name is Sarina Gambale, and I'm a fourth year Law and Society student at Laurier, Brantford. For my final creative project, I created a digital drawing titled The Spirits That Never Fade and wrote a poem called The Never Ending Loop. My project focuses on the long lasting trauma caused by the residential school system in Canada and the ongoing healing within Indigenous communities through remembrance, love, and cultural resilience. For my project, I wanted to use both visual art and poetry to honor the children that were taken out of their communities and the families that were left broken from these tragedies, showing the strength and spirit that continue to exist in Indigenous teachings and culture, even after their identity was tried to be erased. So, I would just like to give a little bit of background on my inspiration and purpose for my pieces. So, this is actually my first time taking an Indigenous Studies course, and I believe that my experience has been very meaningful as it has greatly expanded my understanding of Indigenous history, culture, and their approaches to restoring justice. And in one of my other classes I'm taking this semester, called Intro to Indigenous Studies, we did this participation activity where we actually reenacted the children being taken out of their communities to the residential schools, and every single student was given a different role within the community. So, for example, I was given the role of the clan mother, and as a clan mother, you have a duty to protect the children and your overall community. And this participation activity really helped me understand the trauma and imagine the experiences that they had to live through when these children were taken away and even after, and feel those emotions such as anger, sadness, the grief, and just the overall loss that was created when these children were taken and they couldn't do anything about it. They had no authority over the government. And learning about restorative justice in my law classes over the last 4 years has also shown me that Indigenous justice systems really focus on truth, reconciliation, and restoring balance. And to me, this just seems like the right and healthy way to deal with every case and individual coming in and out of the justice system, regardless if they're Indigenous or not. Indigenous forms of justice really try to address the root causes of harm. And as we go on, you'll see that my drawing and my poem express emotions such as grief, strength, and then carry the message that every child matters. So on the right here, you see my digital drawing, and my digital piece tells the story of the residential schools in two parts. So the left shows the harm, the loss, and the painful truth, while the right shows the remembrance, strength, and the healing that continues in Indigenous communities. So now I would just like to give a deepened explanation of my drawing, and we'll start with the right side. So on the left side of my drawing, everything is much darker and heavier. And as you can see, the church represents the residential school system, which was run by Christian churches where the nuns and priests work directly with Indigenous children. And the crosses and the markers around it symbolize the children who never made it home due to the abuse, neglect, and the disease that was caused by the mistreatment that happened in these institutions. And then above the church, there's a dark bird flying upward. So the bird represents the spirits of the children who were taken and the deep sense of loss that these families still carry today. And then below it, you could see white feathers. So white feathers are actually very sacred in many Indigenous cultures, and they symbolize innocence, truth, and the children whose lives were taken during the residential school era. And so to me, the dark colors, such as the reds and the browns, really show and carry the emotional weight of this history. And it just reflects the violence, the trauma, the colonization, and the attempted cultural destruction caused by these school systems. Now, moving on to the right side of the drawing. So, as you can see, this side is filled with much warmer and brighter tones, so the orange and the yellow. And here we can see the spirits of the children standing in the light. They represent the children who never returned home, but obviously they're still remembered and honored. And then you can see a little girl who's holding an orange rose. This connects to the Every Child Matters initiative. And actually, the color orange stands for remembrance and respect. for both survivors and the children, which is why everyone is encouraged to wear orange on National Truth and Reconciliation Day, which is on September 30th. And then I also believe that she represents today's younger generation, carrying this truth forward and continuing the work of healing. So then you can see a boy who's standing in the center between the darkness and the light. So he represents both the survivors and the children who are being taken, uh, demonstrating the journey from trauma toward healing. And then above them, in the place of the sun, would be the medicine wheel. And this represents balance, healing, and the survival of Indigenous culture, and shows that despite everything, Indigenous identities and teaching will continue to shine and guide communities into a reconciled future. Now, I would just like to give a little bit of an explanation on the medicine wheel. So, the medicine wheel is basically the heart of my drawing. It symbolizes balance, healing, and guidance, but also serves as the sun, shining the way back to culture, identity, and community. And it radiates four sacred colors, and each color has a different meaning. So, it shows that even though the colonial schools and the policies tried to erase Indigenous culture, the medicine wheel will always remain like the eternal sun, always watching and always healing and preserving cultural traditions and language. So now moving on to my poem, I'm just going to read it out loud. The never ending loop. They took our children away from our homes, telling us they would have gained skills and a life full of opportunities. Instead, we are left with an empty hole in our hearts, utter silence as the sound of their voices begin to fade. Time passes and the seasons change. Yet we are still haunted by the fear and loss of our children. They took our voices, soft and small, and replaced them with echoes of pain. They tried to strip us of our language, our songs, our laughter, but our memories and culture can never be erased. Our stories may have been buried, but our roots endure, and the hole in our hearts will forever carry the pain of the children we lost. For those who survived and tried to carry on, the generations to come will not be shunned, our spirits will never fade, and one day our community will be one. So, to me, this poem is telling me that healing is not just about remembering the pain, but is about honoring the incredible strength of Indigenous communities. And then I just want to give a more deepened explanation of the poem. So the poem speaks to the deep pain and the heartbreak of the families torn apart by the residential school system. And it begins with the false promises of opportunity, but also moves into the silence and the loss that follows, even though the purpose of these schools were to erase the indigenous culture and identity. The poem shows that memories, roots, and spirits will forever remain. And to me, this is both a story of grief and a reflection of strength. So, healing comes through remembrance, survival, and the power of cultural memory. And then just the connection and the link toward course concepts and themes. So, when I was creating this drawing and poem, I really wanted to reflect the main concepts that we learned about in class. So, the left side of my drawing shows the harm caused by the residential schools, like the church and the graves. And this connects to what we learned about in chapters 1 to 3 about the trauma and cultural destruction caused by the Christian run schools, where the priests and nuns work directly with the Indigenous children. And then the right side of my drawing represents healing. So the bright colors, the children in the light, and the medicine wheel connect to chapter 4 on intergenerational trauma. So even though trauma can be passed down, culture and stories help communities heal. And in my poem, the line that says memories and culture can never be erased, this relates to Monsieur Angus' point about reclaiming Indigenous language and identity. And then lastly, the medicine wheel and the sense of balance in my drawing just also connect to the wampum teachings and the Indigenous justice that Leonard has explained in his pieces. This focuses on community relationships and restoring harmony. And then finally, the line in my poem, our spirits will never fade, relates to chapter 5 on reconciliation, which is about honoring survivors and rebuilding strength in Indigenous communities. So, overall, my creative piece is about acknowledging pain, honoring truth, and choosing healing over pain. The circle in my painting, the medicine wheel, represents balance, guidance, and the support of mind, body, spirit, and community. Even through centuries of harm, Indigenous spirituality and culture continue to shine through. And the poem, The Never Ending Loop, represents the lasting pain from the forced removal of children and the silencing of their voices. And overall, the drawing in the poem just emphasized that while the past holds lots of pain, the strength, hope, and love within Indigenous communities just continue to shine through, guiding future generations toward healing and a restored sense of balance and that feeling of belonging. Thank you for listening.